Hi everyone, I'm Ashwati Chanat with Mandala South Asian Performing Arts, and we are here today to have a chat with Lykanthea, or Lakshmi Ramgopal, and she'll be performing this week at Mandala Makers Festival, which is in its third week, and we are so excited to again be a part of this process of creating space for artists during a really difficult time, and to have the variety of musicians that we have as a part of this festival is so exciting. Especially excited to have this chat with Lakshmi because we have some similar backgrounds. She brings together dance, music, and really goes within herself and creates based on her experiences, and inevitably challenges the constructs of the dance and music forms that she was trained in. So I'm excited to hear more, bringing her in. Hi!
Hey, how are you? Can you okay?
Doing okay, how are you?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for doing this.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are not a grandma. We're all grandmas in this together.
I like being a grandma. Sometimes I go to bed as early as like 7 p.m. and it feels good.
Yes, and our grandmas are, for me too. My grandma is a source of inspiration in terms of all of my creation. She started me off. I don't know if you heard this, but so many of the artists in our festival this year actually learned from their grandmothers. We have two vocalists that have learned from their grandmothers. We have a Veena player who learned from her grandmother. And then there's you. So I think that's brilliant.
I think it makes
Women passing it on.
I think it makes sense. Grandmas are, I think, a repository for so much wisdom and knowledge and experience. So we can't not learn from them. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think also just growing up here and feeling the roots with our roots are with a specific person because they generate our sense of culture and history. It's yeah, it's an isolated and special experience. So I would love to hear more about your grandma.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, my grandmother, as I've often spoken of her, my maternal grandmother, helped, was really instrumental to my upbringing in terms of helping my parents raise me after they came to the United States. And when I was born, I'm the eldest of two. And so she would spend sometimes, a year at a time or more with us when we were growing up. And as I said to my mother after my grandmother passed away a few years ago, my earliest memories are actually of my grandmother and not of my mom, who was very much around. But there is something really particular about my grandmother's presence that caused her to be the kind of uh, the sort of framing entity of my early childhood.
Yeah.
So yeah, my maternal grandmother is uh, was a really just powerful presence just throughout my childhood and young adulthood. And we would, go every summer to India, and sometimes even during the school year for a month at a time to make sure that we spent time with her after it became hard for her to travel to the United States to see us. And, she's the person who I think for me was my real, like the strongest part of my connection to my cultural heritage.
Mhm.
And so when she passed away a few years ago, I kind of had this sort of profound experience in which I found that my relationship to the world was just reshaped and reframed because she wasn't part of it anymore. So, uh, and in addition to that, I was able to be with her when she passed away and to say goodbye and to be part of all of her last rites, which we're in my family, and there's a really set of powerful sort of rituals you go through when you say goodbye to somebody and help them move on to the next stage after they leave their after they exit their time with us. And that was a really important moment for kind of rethinking how I even relate to my religious background, which I ever really had much of a relationship with. And, saying goodbye to her in that way was just completely transformative, and made its way very quickly into my art practice. The same summer she passed away, my eldest niece was born, my brother's eldest daughter. And so, and they missed each other just by 2 months. And so the kind of inherent tragedy of that missed connection has really kind of become a central part of my art practice in terms of kind of reimagining a space in which all of us can be together, these amazing women in my family, and kind of bringing to life the things that remind me of these women and my relationship to them and how they teach me, and in turn how I can teach them. And in doing so, I've come to think of my art practice itself as a repository for all of this knowledge that my maternal grandmother had, and the knowledge that I've come to gain even through the experience of being an aunt to my now 2 nieces.
I think it's so beautiful that you think of your practice as being the space for memories and processing. I've been saying this over and over, but I feel like learning in these very formal, structured, classical forms that we're, I guess, preserving here in the diaspora, we often don't know that we can navigate these forms in a personal way, and we aren't given the permission to. So breaking some of those barriers takes risks, and you're doing it all the time. How did you first accept that we're going to do this? Like, what were the steps that you took to begin this practice?
This is one of the reasons I love speaking with other South Asians about, my practice, because I think it's other South Asians who have, been trained in classical forms, quote unquote classical forms, who kind of really see the different risks that are taken when one starts to experiment with those forms. So I was trained in Carnatic vocal music, and also in Bharatanatyam, one of the big classical forms of South Asian dance, and which is particularly with South India. And I trained in both of those for many years. I was a dancer for long enough to be Arangetram, which is the solo dance performance that you give when you formally ascend the stage as a dancer. And I kind of left all of those behind soon after high school. And then, then I went to college, in part because I had a very fraught relationship with those art forms, the same way I think a lot of young people do, bicultural backgrounds, and particularly from my generation. I think like older millennials from, with our kind of set of identities, in some ways occupy a particular like unease that I think my younger contemporaries are freed from, or which they maybe experience in a different way. And so it took me many years to actually come back to both of these forms in a really explicit way. So while my singing style has always been informed by my Carnatic training, I didn't really make it a kind of purposeful subject of my work until my grandmother passed away and my nieces were born. And it was because I think it was through those art forms that I felt I had the most to say, and through which I could speak the most clearly, both in terms of processing my grief about losing my grandmother, but also kind of processing the joyful experiences that I have as a kind of alternate mother to these 2 little girls. But it is always scary to experiment in this way, because there's a big taboo against experimentation in South Asian communities. And I don't even mean that wholly critically. I think that there are reasons for wanting to maintain forms in a certain way. But on the other hand, that emphasis on this is the correct way to do this, itself has ties to colonialism, and itself kind of reifies colonial structures, particularly in the way that sort of Brahmin politics have come into being in the last, in the decades since independence in India in particular. So, there in many ways a number of political statements, many of which are not ones that I'm setting out to make, but which I make nevertheless,
Yes.
in expanding, statements about what Indian culture looks like or supposed to sound like, what an Indian woman is supposed to do. I'm neither married nor have children, and that's a big departure from what is a normative and idealized lifestyle. And all of these things come out in the art that I do. I've always had an uneasy relationship with my voice, since I don't have a beautiful, like, kind of MS Subbulakshmi kind of voice, or the kind of voice my grandmother had, and didn't achieve a level of training with Carnatic music to control it in the way that it's supposed to be controlled. And I've kind of made my with the fact that I'll never make peace with it, and have tried to embrace that as a part of what I do as a vocalist in particular. So all of these things are kind of floating around in my practice, which has become increasingly focused on experimenting with South Asian cultural forms in an explicit way, and has also come to use a lot of movement, which was not part of my practice before, through the inclusion of Bharatanatyam inspired elements.
Yeah, I did watch a short clip of your residency in, it was like a church like space. It was very beautiful with stained glass, and sorry, I don't know the name of the space. And yeah, I think it's gorgeous how you weave together like sound and space and movement and gestural movement, and it can convey so much outside of these contexts that we're taught in. It has the capacity to emote beyond Sanskrit or Telugu or Tamil. Like, you're able to tell stories that are present and breathing through what you're doing, which is so beautiful. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you. I think it's it's a way of making these forms work for who I am, right? And who I am is not the person I would have been had I grown up in India, over the last couple decades, or had I been born in an earlier time. And so I think making sure that they are malleable is a way of maintaining their power. I think the insistence that they not change, to me, weakens their power over time. And the space you were thinking about is the Glasner Studio, which is a place that was designed and built by Edgar Miller in Chicago's Old Town. It's early 20th century. And that was a really amazing performance, I think, because the ensemble I worked with, who make everything I do possible. So this kind of solo performance I'm doing on Friday is unusual in that I'm doing it on my own rather than with Asha Rowland and Joanna Brock and Erica Miller, who all bring everything to life most of the time in non-COVID times. In that performance, we used the entire house as a kind of extended metaphor for kind of life transitions. And so we had our audience as we moved through different spaces of the house and performed as we moved through it. And I like to think of houses as spaces that contain memories. And it was a way creating new memories out of old cultural traditions in a space that was not constructed for that kind of those kinds of art forms, that made it, I think, a particularly beautiful and unique performance in my career as a performer.
Well, everyone check this out. Edward Glasner Studio. Am I saying
Edgar Miller?
Edward Miller.
So
oh gosh,
it's the Glasner Studio in Chicago that was designed and built by Edgar Miller.
Okay, thank you. So what are some, I know you have a big project released next week, that's being released next week, right? Some Viscera is that next week?
No, it doesn't have a release date.
Sorry.
So joke with the ensemble is that I've been talking about my forthcoming album for I don't know, maybe 2 years now. So Some Viscera is a body of music that comes out of the loss of my grandmother and birth of my nieces. And it's a collection of lullabies, and it kind of plays with the genre of the lullaby as something that is created as not only as a way to get someone to go to sleep, but to convey kind of cultural anxieties and other cultural other forms of cultural knowledge. Lullabies are really kind of creepy, and so I kind of started jokingly calling myself the spooky Raffi, because some of them I wrote for my nieces, and I did sing one to one of them once, and she was like, "Please stop." But yeah, so it's 5 or 6 songs that are lullabies for my grandmother and my nieces, and they're inspired in particular by motifs drawn from nature, and specifically birds and plants, and the ones that I associate most closely with my grandmother and also with and with India in general. So there are a lot of references to the kuyal, which is a bird that you can hear all over India, has a very distinctive call that I associate with my grandmother's house in Bangalore, and which was itself sound.
Oh. Hey all, I'm not sure if Lakshmi's Wi-Fi drifted off or it was me, but let me see if I can bring her back on. Hey,
Sorry.
I'm not sure if it was me or you. I'm sorry. My Wi-Fi has been a little off.
Life in every way. But yeah, so I think I was talking about birds and plants.
Yes.
And yeah, so this album is so refers to these botanical and avian motifs as a way of kind of evoking memories that I have of particular plants and birds that I associate with these amazing women. And so one is the kuyal, which I mentioned, which is important throughout Indian or I should say South Asian poetry and even Bollywood music, and also jasmine flowers and lotus flowers. And so the plan was to record the album over summer 2020, which was not possible. So at the moment, the actual recording and release of the project is on hold. I'm not sure we'll be able to even do it this summer, but I'm hoping we can do it in the fall if it's safe. And it's going to be a live album because every time we've performed it differently because of the extensive improvisation that I like to bring into my performance work. And I realized that there was no real way to finish the songs when they had always lived in these sort of fluid, ambiguous states. So it makes sense to record it live. So we found a really special space in Chicago to record it live, and hopefully we'll still be able to do that. And it'll be out, I hope, early 2022. But
I hope so too. I'm sorry, this is so frustrating. Everybody's on hold, and you need people. You need all of these folks to be in the space with you. So
yeah.
I don't know if it was cutting out earlier. Did you say you were going to record in a conservatory?
No, so what I had mentioned was that the sound installation I had created a couple of years ago that was in Garfield Park Conservatory, and that was called A Half-Light Chorus. And the kuyal, the bird I just mentioned, the initial inspiration for that project, I used to hear a bird at my grandmother's house in Bangalore every time I visited her. And I had no idea what the species was, but it was a bird I'd heard around different places in India. And so when Experimental Sound Studio in Chicago commissioned the installation, and it was going to be located in the Fern Room of Garfield Park Conservatory, I immediately knew I wanted to play with this idea of birdsong and memory. And so I went to Cornell University's huge database of animal recordings, and I looked up in their sort of citizen science section most commonly reported birds by people in India who do bird watching, because I was like, this has to be one of the most common birds. I've heard it so often in India, not just at my grandma's house, and I listened to all of them until I found the bird. And it was the quail, and it was so amazing because the quail is a cuckoo bird that lays its eggs in the nests of other birds. So other birds raise children, and as it turns out, it's an incredibly kind of important bird in medieval Sanskrit poetry. It comes up in Bollywood music. It comes up in the film songs of film industries in other parts of India, not just Bollywood, as this just really beautiful bird that has this like weird sort of problematic family kind of like structure, and maybe not problematic, but
so does it, once it lays its eggs, it just leaves its young? Like,
yep,
oh, okay.
Yep.
I see.
And so some cuckoos, there are some species of cuckoo, as I understand it, which once they hatch in the nests of other birds, they like push other eggs out or the other babies out. I don't and I choose not to, but you know, it's an interesting bird about identity and place in one's family. And so it was a really beautiful coincidence that this is the species that turned out to be the one that I heard at my grandmother's place. So
you knew.
Right.
You had this connection.
Exactly. So the installation itself ended up kind of comprising of a composition I created using recordings I made of women imitating birds from South Asia. And I kind of put it together into one long 90-minute piece that played from 4 different corners of the fern room in the conservatory, accompanied by performances in there. So I think, you know, the theme of birds and flowers is something I'm going to stick with for a long time. It's kind of, you know, there's such a profound part of how we experience South Asian culture. In terms of the visual arts, architecture, textiles, everything. And of course the sound and smell. And so, you know, I think, you know, by profession, I'm an academic and I like to stick with one thing for a very, very long time. And so I think these particular themes are ones that I'll be working with for some time to come.
I'm excited to see other iterations of birds and flowers in your work.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and to chat with me. I feel like I have so many more questions for you, and I just want to see your work. And I'm bummed that we don't get to see your ensemble work for this, but your solo work is evocative, and I think it's really no, it is. And I think, you know, again, we have, our audience is far ranging, and I think it's important to, again, like include traditional artists with those who are reinventing, and there's merit and beauty in all of it. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be part of this festival. And, you know, it's so rare to have the opportunity to actually perform in spaces curated by other people in the South Asian diaspora. And it's really meaningful, especially when, you know, different versions of those forms or different iterations of those forms are juxtaposed with each other, because I think it really shows the kind of the durability of forms and the fact that they are really open to different kinds of meaning and interpretation. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day. We will see you on Friday.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Go to makersfestival.mandalaarts.org and register. You can watch it live on Facebook. And the stream will be released at 7 p.m. on Friday. And if you register, you get it emailed directly to you. So do that. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.